What you see before you is a relic codenamed U1, or simply Soul Cube. It was discovered in 2104, located in a geographic region where UAC researchers have unearthed evidence of a long-lost civilization. We know nothing of this civilization other than they existed, and that they were all wiped out in some type of cataclysmic event, according to what we've been able to decode from stone tablets found throughout the ruins. What clues we have been able to piece together reveal a culturally advanced society whose technology can only be described as mystic, as evidenced by U1's strange characteristics. Efforts to further examine U1 have been futile. We also have had no success in deciphering the symbols adorning U1. Our research continues, and we hope that with continued investment and research, we can, one day soon, learn to exploit the technologies that make up U1.
Hello everyone, welcome to another edition of our original series, Questioning the Historical Narrative, where we revisit the often laughably unbelievable tale that is official history, which has been presented to our culture as settled science for generations. And yet, this narrative is full of inconsistencies, misunderstandings, and yes, even lies, and has given rise to defensive institutions filled with fragile egos, erecting literal and allegorical bulwarks against valid and often healthy questions or skeptical examination. Anyone who publicly scrutinizes or makes claims which contradict the narrative are ostracized by the professional academians who are accredited by the worldwide network of universities. You see, the people who defend the widely believed version of history have constructed their worldview based on what they read in textbooks. They've been conditioned by the higher educational system, so to speak, to believe that historical truth can only be found within the pages of said books, and anything which falls outside of said informational sources simply cannot be true. This belief system is further insulated from any sort of major changes due to the many years, not to mention many thousands of dollars, said students have personally invested into the belief system, rendering them less than neutral observers, less than rational preservers of history, and more rather unwitting defenders of a fairy tale that is, well, scientism. For those of you new to this channel, scientism is a ghastly beast which mimics genuine fields of study and advancement using a vast infrastructure of educational and government systems to defend itself against skeptical discourse. So like in the field of history, if one's claims aren't sourced in some previously approved textbook, then they simply cannot be true. Regardless of any physical evidence supporting such claims, no matter how overwhelming the evidence might be. Any claims that assail the dogmas of scientism which are not sourced in the existing annals of scientism are routinely scoffed at and ridiculed, if not simply ignored by the official defenders of the religion, which is why we can aptly label capital H history as just one wing of scientism, of which there are indeed many. Of course, most people will disagree that the broad category of history can even fall under the banner of scientism, since history isn't exactly science per se. However, in my opinion, that is wholly immaterial. The primary hallmark of scientism is the institutional insulation of the status quo at the expense of the truth and at the expense of the students who are pressured into believing in the authority of the institution in order to succeed in their education and ultimately in their career. The religion of scientism elevates those who conform to its doctrines and exiles those who fail to adhere to the well-trodden path. In today's video, we're going to delve into the distant past, into one of the most remarkable achievements of our ancient forebears, the Silk Road, and how it raises some pointed questions towards the official historical narrative, ranging from the technological capabilities of the ancients to the very foundings of America. Buckle up for an astonishing look into our stolen history, the Silk Road. Quickly, before we get started, I wanted to mention that this channel is still viewer supported. So if our content makes a difference for you, if you like our content and you'd like to help me continue producing, please consider becoming a channel supporter through PayPal or Venmo for one-time contributions or through Patreon for recurring monthly support. I'd be lying if I told you we weren't struggling, trying to keep our heads above water, so to speak. So your support is greatly appreciated. And thanks so much to our existing channel patrons and supporters. We couldn't do this without you, so thank you very much. We love you guys. So let's get into it. We all know that Christopher Columbus is claimed to have discovered the American continents during the tail end of the 15th century. It is claimed that he was commissioned by the Spanish monarchy to sail west across the Atlantic in order to establish a shipping line directly to the east coast of Asia in order to avoid the arduous taxes and tariffs involved with imports from the Far East. Imports which simply weren't available locally at the time. Products we'd maybe consider mundane staples in our modern era, which were allegedly at the time deemed luxury items like tea, silk, spices, and probably more seedy goods like opium and the like. If a confirmed passage over the sea could be achieved, the Spanish royals reckoned they could avoid huge markups charged by the merchants who physically trudged said goods thousands of miles across myriad borders, braving treacherous deserts and mountain ranges, risking literal life and limb to laboriously travel over land, who would rightfully expect compensation for their troubles, often paying taxes and tolls themselves to foreign entities who were not thusly paying taxes or homages to the European royals. So this was a problem for the royals, allegedly. Not only that, but if they could indeed avoid all this hassle and cost by using their own seafaring vessels, thus avoiding the Silk Road altogether, they could profit heavily by exporting goods directly to the east coast of Asia, cutting out the aforementioned ground-based shipping enterprises by offering lower prices than their competitions for their brand of exports, while still making a killing by avoiding the same taxes and tolls on exported goods. So, according to the official historical narrative, establishing an ocean-based shipping route directly to the east coast of Asia would spell huge windfalls of profits for whomever did it first and cornered the markets of the East Asian port cities, literally killing the competition on exported goods and paying pennies on the dollar, so to speak, for imported goods from the Far East. Before going any further, there are a couple of very important points to highlight about this portion of the narrative. According to the religion of scientism, everyone has known about the proportions of the ball Earth since like the 2nd century BC. The ancient Greek known as Eratosthenes calculated the size of the ball Earth using a brilliant application of the Pythagorean theorem. Ultimately, Eratosthenes' method of estimating the size of the ball Earth would render its equatorial circumference as about 25,000 miles, making the distance between the Canary Islands and Japan about 12,000 miles across the ocean. Of course, Christopher Columbus was one of the few people in the world, allegedly, who, although he was a very accomplished navigator, he wrongfully reckoned the distance between the Canary Islands and Japan as only about 6,000 miles, which is why he never would have guessed an entire continent the size of the Americas could possibly be hidden between the west coast of Europe and the east coast of Asia. So even though everyone has known the Earth was a ball and they've known its dimensions ever since Eratosthenes estimated its size about 2,000 years ago, a very accurate estimate too, allegedly, it wouldn't be until after Columbus's famous Atlantic voyage that the globe-Earth models would be produced. The oldest known globe-Earth scale model was literally constructed in 1493, just one short year after Columbus's voyage. Now, we'll get back to the main point of this video in just a minute, but it's important to point out that while an Atlantic shipping route from Europe to Japan would certainly be an extremely attractive and lucrative bit of cultural infrastructure, it took the European royals about 1,500 years to even attempt establishing such a route, which is rather odd indeed, is it not? I mean, one would think that the royals would have been looking for ways to avoid the ground-based shipping routes and all of its tariffs and taxes since the Silk Road had been in use, especially since the distance by sea was reckoned to be only a little bit further by the likes of Columbus as compared to the land-based route over the Silk Road, through the Gobi Desert and across many mountain ranges and hostile territories. But no, they only wanted to try that starting in the 1400s, according to the narrative. The Silk Road is said to have been completed and in use as early as the 2nd century BC, right around the same time when Eratosthenes would have been calculating the size of the assumed ball Earth. European countries have been braving the seas and navigating long distances throughout for centuries by the time Columbus discovered America. So there's some food for thought, and keep this information in the back of your mind as we continue the video. Now, let's look a bit at the Silk Road itself. This is a massive trade route which spans over 6,000 miles, cutting across the lands of many empires, through some extremely rough terrain, and through extremely hostile territories, as they say. The ancient Ptolemy listed many of the cities which either sprang up along the Silk Road or even pre-existed the completion of the route and then subsequently benefited from its frequent use by traders and merchants, raking in taxes and tariffs as they passed through with their goods. And I'll just run through really quickly and try to find some images of ruined cities in these places. So the Silk Road spanned across Africa, that's East Africa, and by the way, this is Ptolemy's list. These ancient cities are what he would have called them and not necessarily what we call them today. So in Africa, across East Africa, in Akhmim, Aradaman Emporion, Axum, Kolo, Dongola, Juba, Maji, Opon, Panopolis, Serapion, Sennar. You've got North Africa through Caesarea, Carthage, Cyrene, Leptis Magna, Marzuk, Sigil Massa, Tamanrasset, Tingis. And Arabia, you've got Cain, Eudaimon, Arabia, Mocha, Masalan, Sanaz, Zafar, and Sao. Then, of course, Bangladesh through Songara. China, you've got Katagara, Chengdu, Kafig, Kitai. The list goes on and on through Europe, through India, through Pakistan, Persia, the Persian Gulf, through the Red Sea, and through Southeast Asia. And then even through unknown places on the map today, through Ekbatana. I only just briefly listed a few of the places. There were many, many cities that this route, the Silk Road, went through, and many of these places have just astonishing ruins to be found there. And again, these places would have been built allegedly thousands of years ago by simpletons, many of which didn't even have such technologies as the wheel. The vastness of the Silk Road is difficult to comprehend indeed. According to the mainstream narrative, again, the Silk Road was first used as a trade route during the 2nd century BC. The notion that this trade route was used across the known world for over 1,500 years, and it took Christopher Columbus to find America on accident on the behest of the Queen of Spain, is definitely suspect, especially considering that, according to Wikipedia, Columbus believed the distance from the Canary Islands to Japan across the Atlantic Ocean was only about 6,000 miles. So how is it possible that such an undertaking never occurred 100 years earlier, or say 500 years earlier, or even 1,000 years earlier? What was stopping the countless seafaring empires that benefited from the infrastructure at great cost and peril coming and going from at least trying to cross the sea in order to stumble upon America on accident themselves, long before Columbus finally did so in 1492, allegedly, again, just 1 year before the first scale globe Earth models were produced? To shed light on a possible answer to this question, let's consider the fact that Egyptian mummies have been found to have traces of nicotine and cocaine in their systems after being tested by German toxicologist Svetlana Balabanova back in 1992. It's important to understand that both tobacco and the coca plant, from which cocaine is derived, were simply not found in the known world during the time of ancient Egypt, and were in fact indigenous to the American continents right up until the point where America was allegedly discovered. This means that quite possibly, and almost certainly, that a trade route between the ancient Americas and the ancient Egyptians existed long before Columbus ever put his shoes on. If it is true that such an oceanic trade relationship between ancient Americas and Egyptians, where they were at least trading cocaine and tobacco during the time of ancient Egypt, then why would it be necessary for Columbus to so-called discover the Americas? Is it possible that this is just a front, a cover story? And for what? What are they hiding? The idea that the ancients, who were often seafaring and exploratory cultures capable of architectural and civil engineering feats we find all over the world, were simply too daft to even attempt sailing west from Europe or sailing east from Japan to find such a trade route and eventually stumbling into America is simply laughable and unbelievable. Couple that with the tales of the likes of Leif Erikson, who is said to have discovered America hundreds of years before Columbus, it does raise some eyebrows now, doesn't it? The fact that we couple that with the fact that we find similar architecture in the Americas and in the Old World, as they say, should speak volumes to this conundrum. I think it's safe to say that there was almost certainly trade between the Americas and the Eurasian continent without much reservation. More than that, the evidence seems to suggest that there was in fact a worldwide civilization, which was highly advanced, spanning the entire world, and yet, for some reason, the modern powers which ought not be would rather us not know about this culture, which is why we find so many inconsistencies in their historical narrative, because the narrative is filled with lies. Not only that, but if the ancients were using agonists such as cocaine, opium, hashish, and nicotine since the dawn of time, indeed empires have risen and fallen due to the drug trade for thousands of years, certainly, why has our modern culture been so enthusiastically trying to ban the use of such agonists during our modern era? Our culture would have us believe that the use of such natural plant-based agonists is evil, and it's a new problem that we in the modern world are the first ones to experience. But it does seem that the problem is prohibition and not the plants themselves. So with that, we're going to wrap this one up, guys. Thanks so much for watching. I do appreciate you. Once again, if you'd like to help support this channel, there's links in the description for PayPal, Patreon, and Venmo and Cash App and all those. Keyword on all those is the Morgile. So God bless you guys. Thanks for watching. As always, spread the word, spread the world, and peace out, everybody. See you in the next one.